Hello students, it's Sam Bennett, your guide to critical thinking, and this is another short video on a key concept. In this video, I'm going to be looking at inductive arguments that look weak but are strong. Okay, so you might call these tricky inductive arguments. They're arguments that might appear to be weak, but in fact, they're strong. Before we dive into that topic, let me just make an important point, which is that only inductive arguments can be strong or weak. In other words, if an argument is deductive, do not ask yourself whether it's strong or weak. That question just does not apply. To give you an analogy, it's kind of like how bicycles don't get good or bad gas mileage, right? If it's a bike, the question of whether it gets good or bad gas mileage just does not apply. All right. Now, let's look at this example, okay? Here's an example of a tricky inductive argument. All right, here's the argument. 85% of Americans speak Russian. Thus, it is likely that my neighbor, who is an American, speaks Russian. All right, so I want you to pause the video and ask yourself two questions. First, give a guess as to why this argument is inductive, and then take a guess, take a stab at why this argument is strong and not weak. Okay, so the reason it is inductive first is that, look, the speaker wouldn't say that 85% of Americans speaking Russian guarantees that his neighbor speaks Russian. They would only say that it makes it likely that the conclusion follows, that their neighbor speaks Russian. So that's why it's inductive. So just remember in general, right, this crucial difference between saying the conclusion is likely to follow from the information or from the premises given. There's a big difference between saying something is likely to follow from saying something is guaranteed to follow. When the speaker believes the conclusion is likely to follow, then it's an inductive argument. But when the speaker believes the conclusion is guaranteed 100% to follow, then it is deductive. All right, but now back to that argument. Why is it strong? Okay, why is this argument strong? Even though it's super false, right? Notice there's a premise in this argument, 85% of Americans speak Russian. That premise is super, super false, right? 85% of Americans definitely do not speak Russian. All right, so even though there's a false premise, the argument is still strong. Why? It is strong because if 85% of Americans spoke Russian, if 85% of Americans spoke Russian, then my neighbor probably would speak Russian. Right? If you imagine that you're watching a movie where 85% of Americans speak Russian, then in that movie, the neighbor probably would speak Russian. Okay, so here's why it's strong. The conclusion would probably follow if, like in a movie, the information were true. Let's do another example, okay? The more examples you do, the easier it will get. All right, here's the argument. You ready? Most likely, my bed of roses will turn into a flock of swans this year. Wow. Since for the past 89 years, my bed of roses has turned into a flock of swans. Can you imagine that? Okay. First, the argument is strong, but now I want you to pause the video and take a guess. Why do you guess that it is strong? Well, here it is. Again, it's super false. I know that it's super false, right? The claim that for the past 89 years, my bed of roses has turned into a flock of swans, super, super false. Nevertheless, the argument is strong, okay? Don't throw anything at me. Let me explain. This is why it's strong. If, like in a movie, if it were the case that my bed of roses for the past 89 years had turned into a flock of swans, then probably my bed of roses would turn into a flock of swans this year, right? So this is why it's strong. The conclusion would probably follow if, like in a movie, the information were true. Now, here's something to keep in mind. The argument is strong, but it's not what we call cogent. It is uncogent. Why? The fact that it is super false, the fact that, um, you know, my bed of roses has not turned into a flock of swans for the past 89 years, that means it's uncogent. That's the word we use to describe that. We say it's uncogent, right? If ever an inductive argument has a false premise, it's uncogent. Similarly, like that other argument we were looking at, right? Remember this first one? 85% of Americans speak Russian, that whole one? That one is also uncogent, right? The fact that it is super false means it is uncogent, even though it's strong. All right. Thanks for watching this video. I hope that was helpful to you. Just keep, if you have to rewatch it, that might help. Okay. But just keep at it.